Do any of you remember Outdoor Ed? If you don't remember or just plain don't know, I'll give you a brief rundown. Outdoor Education, or ED for short, is a school camping trip that takes students to the woods where they can learn more about the outdoors. My Outdoor Ed's trip took me to the snow-infested mountains, and for the most part it was completely boring save for the occasional snowball fight. Then the last night occurred, and I will never forget it for as long as I live. Now before that night, I didn't have any trouble sleeping, but the last night, it was like something was wrong. At first I assumed it was just homesickness, first time away from my parents, you see. But then I looked to my cabin mates and counselor, and from the look on their face, I could tell they were feeling it too. It was a tense several minutes, and then something started calling our names. It was barely more than a whisper, but all of us heard it. The voice seductive, alluring. It made us want to go outside, but the small amount of common sense I had in the back of my head ordered me to stay put. Charlie. My counselor did not feel the same way and left the cabin to investigate. We could hear him yelling from outside. Come on, guys. This isn't funny. The kids are trying to sleep. I guess he assumed it was some sort of prank. After a few minutes of silence, he rushed back inside. There's someone out here. Stay inside. He grabbed something from his bag and left. Listen, this is your only warning. I'm armed, and if you intend to hurt these kids, I will shoot. There was silence, and I heard the loudest noise I've ever heard. 2 consecutive bangs. I could hear the other counselors come outside and hear them talk. I can't hear what they say, but my counselor comes back and says that for the rest of the night we have to stay indoors. Eventually, I slept and drifted out. Next morning, as the students are boarding the buses to leave, we see police cars on the road and police officers talking to my counselor. He described it as something barely resembling a human, taller than 10 feet, with skin so pale you could mistake it for snow. It was all he could see before he fired and the creature ran off. Suffice to say, I've had nightmares about it and am now forbidden from going on any more camping trips. Now that I'm a bit older and a little bit wiser, my best guess is that it was a Wendigo. But this was Southern California, an unusual place for such a cryptid. When I was in the 4th grade, I went to a pretty small charter school. I loved it so much. I loved every teacher I had. Our cafeteria was fairly small and we didn't have a real kitchen since the cafeteria doubled as the library. So we just got food shipped in from a caterer. Anyway, I knew almost all the cafeteria people because they were the other teachers and some of the office ladies. We had recess aides that cleaned up the tables and everything. One day there was a new guy there. He was tall. Maybe that's just because I was small. He had glasses, short hair, and seemed pretty built. He was cleaning up tables and weirdly staring at the children. You know, that just horrific feeling you get when you know something is very bad and shouldn't be happening. I had that feeling. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like I was going to throw up. As a child, I was very trusting and never felt this way before. It was only with this man. I ignored it, and just kind of observed him with my friend Abigail at the time. For about 2 weeks this kept happening. I'm going into the lunchroom, eat as fast as I could, and try not to make eye contact with the dude. Also, just some more detail. After we were done eating, we had to clean up our trash and then raise our hand so an aide could tell us if we could leave or not. So one day I'm done with my lunch, my friend and I raise our hands, and I'm praying he's not the one to tell us to go because I hated looking at him, as he always made me feel terrible and on edge. But lo and behold, he looks right in our direction. Usually aides are fairly lenient and would just nod their heads from across the room, but he walks slowly over to us, gets an inch away from the table, pulls out his rag and wipes it. You left a lot of crumbs. We just stared at him because what do we say? It was his job to clean up the crumbs. We pick up our trash, but he stares at us for what felt like forever and he says, "You two are so adorable. You're like sisters with pretty blonde hair and big eyes. Like dolls." I seriously thought I was going to vomit. Then he continued, "Do you girls play with dolls? I'm sure you do. I bet you like dressing them up, huh?" You might be thinking that that was harmless or what he said wasn't that bad, but he had never spoken to a kid before, at least that I had ever seen. He didn't even speak to the other aides. He finally told us we could go and waved after leaving. I told my mum the first time I saw him, but now I ran to my teacher's classroom and told her everything. That I always had a terrible feeling about him and what he said, and Abigail backed me up saying she felt the same way. The very next day I didn't see him, and never saw him again after that. That sounds drastic, but I'm glad the school took it seriously because who knows if a kid would have gone missing or hurt by him. I'm only assuming that's what happened, but I was relieved to never have to see him again.
Tree climbing had always been one of my favorite things to do when I was little. It didn't matter how tall they were. As long as they were trees, I could climb them. My personal record for reaching the top of a tree was 60 seconds, which probably isn't that impressive, but for me at the time, I was proud of that. I lived with my grandma back then, and I'd always climb this one tree in our front yard, then swing on it for hours. But one nightmarish incident made me stay away from trees from that point on. It started out like any other day. I went out to the front yard after breakfast, ready to do some climbing as usual. I kicked off my shoes and took off my socks, since I was more adept at climbing while barefoot. Then I made my way up the tree trunk and grabbed onto the lowest branch I could. Closing my eyes, I decided to just dangle there in the air, enjoying the wind brushing against my face. After 5 minutes, I heard someone giggling below me. I looked down, and to my surprise, I saw an old woman with pale skin, dressed in a black gown, sitting at the base of the tree. At least, she looked like a woman. She was giggling while covering her face with her hands like she was playing peekaboo or something. Alarm bells should have been going off in my head right about now, but I was a very naive 8-year-old, so I didn't think she was dangerous. Instead of calling for my grandma, I asked her, "What's so funny?" while casually dangling from the branch above her. The woman looked up at me with her bloodshot eyes and smiled, like she was happy I started talking to her. Then her smile grew wider, revealing her razor-sharp teeth. "What's funny, my dear, is that in the next few seconds, I'm going to snatch you right out of that tree like a juicy, low-hanging fruit, and then I'm going to gobble you up from head to toe," she said with a soft giggle. My face went pale after hearing those words and seeing the woman's monstrous teeth. I was so scared that I just froze up, clinging to the branch a little tighter while my bare feet dangled above her head. Whoever this woman was, she clearly wasn't human. I snapped out of my daze when she stood up and began reaching for my legs with her inhumanly long arms. I quickly brought my legs up and over the branch, then started climbing for my life. The woman let out a sadistic cackle as she started climbing after me. Now, I was pretty confident in my climbing ability since I had 2 major advantages over her. I was smaller and I had bare feet. Also, you'd think she would have trouble climbing a tree at her age, but, surprisingly, she was on my heels within seconds. And I mean, she was literally snapping her teeth at my heels while I climbed, like some kind of animal. It took every ounce of concentration I had not to stumble and fall into her clutches. As I continued to climb, she'd say things like, "I'm gonna get you," and "You better climb faster, sweetie," just to scare me and make me lose my footing. But I just tuned out her words and focused on the climb. All I could hear were the soles of my bare feet slapping one branch after another as I moved with a sense of life-threatening urgency. But in spite of my efforts, I was still just a kid. So it didn't take long before I made my first mistake. While climbing, my foot slipped off a branch due to my state of panic and not getting a proper foothold on the tree. I quickly grabbed onto the trunk with both hands, then frantically moved my foot around, searching for a groove that my toes could rest on, to regain my footing. But there wasn't one. I was stuck. And in that moment, the woman didn't hesitate to try and bite my foot while it dangled in the air above her head. But thankfully, my fear kept me going and I managed to pull my foot back up in time. "So close!" Almost had you there." She'd laugh, enjoying the chase. After making it halfway up the tree, the woman suddenly got quiet, so I looked down to see if she was still there. But she was gone. Not a single trace was left of her. For a moment, I began to wonder if I'd imagined her. Suddenly, two large hands grabbed both of my ankles, pulling my feet out from under me and causing me to fall on my back. Before I knew it, I was hoisted into the air, dangling upside down by my feet. I frantically looked up to see the creature's horrifying face smiling down at me. I don't know how it reached the top before I did. I didn't even see it pass me. This thing's movements defied logic. "Told you I'd snatch you up," it said while licking its teeth. "Now to enjoy my prize." The creature then opened its mouth inhumanly wide, revealing hundreds of sharp teeth. It then slowly brought my feet up to its open maw, ready to devour me. I screamed at the top of my lungs as I kicked my legs frantically, trying to free myself, but to no avail. I was only saved when my grandma came outside after I screamed. The creature quickly dropped me before disappearing without a trace, almost as if it never existed. I got out of that tree so fast and ran straight into my grandma's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to explain to her what I'd seen, but she didn't believe me. Years have passed since then, but I'll never forget that thing's face for as long as I live.